cracker next fall.
What's the matter, Homer? Not cut out for mining coal? Me neither.
His father laughed at him in front of the entire town. In front of the entire town. Not because Homer Hickam was lazy, not because he was stupid, but because in Coalwood, West Virginia, boys like Homer were never supposed to dream beyond the coal mine. A town trapped inside the Appalachian Mountains where every road eventually led back to one place, the mine. Men spent their entire lives underground, breathing coal dust just to survive. Fathers handed the job to their sons, and sons were expected to accept it, without question. Homer's older brother, Jim, already had a way out. Football. College scouts wanted him. Teachers respected him. His father was proud of him. But Homer was the quiet son, the invisible one, the son nobody expected anything from, until one night something crossed the sky. Sputnik, the first satellite ever launched into space. And while the rest of America panicked over the Soviet Union winning the space race, Homer saw something completely different. Escape. That single moment changed his life forever, because after staring at that light in the sky for less than a minute, Homer made a decision that sounded completely insane. He was going to build rockets in a coal mining town with no money, no training, no future. And the worst part? His own father thought it was pathetic. At first, people laughed when Homer and his friends started testing homemade rockets in empty fields. Then, one of the rockets exploded sideways and destroyed his mother's fence in front of half the neighborhood. That was the moment John Hickam finally snapped.
He's a menace, and he's a damn thief. And so is whoever helped.
Standing in the yard, staring at the wreckage, he looked directly at his son and basically told him the truth every person in Coalwood believed. Dreams don't matter here. Only the mine does. And from that moment on, Homer wasn't just trying to build rockets anymore. He was trying to prove an entire town wrong. If you've ever had someone look you in the eye and tell you your dream was a waste of time, stay right here, because this story is for you.
Yeah. 10, 9, 8. Should we get behind something?
The fence gets repaired. Elsie Hickam makes sure of that, quickly and quietly, the way she handles most things in that house. But the damage to Homer? That isn't fixed so fast, because his father didn't just dismiss the rockets in private. He did it publicly. In Coalwood, that matters. This is a small town. Everyone watches. Everyone remembers. And when John Hickam says something, it carries the weight of the mine behind it. Homer goes back to his room. He doesn't quit. He opens his school library card and checks out every book they have on propulsion, combustion, and rocketry. The librarian looks at him funny. She checks the books out anyway. He reads until the words stop making sense. Then he sleeps. Then he reads again. Because the one thing his father's mockery couldn't touch was what Homer already knew he felt when he watched that light cross the sky. Now the real problems start stacking up. Building rockets is not just about enthusiasm. It requires materials, metal casings, fuel compounds, ignition mechanisms. It requires space to launch, and it requires money. Money that 4 boys from a coal town in West Virginia absolutely do not have. Homer goes to Quentin first, because Quentin is the only person he knows who treats physics like a first language. Quentin agrees to help, but immediately outlines every structural problem with their first design. The nozzle diameter is wrong, the fuel mixture is too unstable, the casing can't handle the combustion pressure. It's not a rocket, it's a pipe bomb with ambitions. They need better materials. They need scrap metal from the mine. The mine won't give it to them. They need a safe launch site outside of town. Nobody will offer them one. They need to be taken seriously. And every adult in Coalwood, led by the example set by John Hickam himself, has already decided these boys are a joke. Every door locked from the outside. Homer swallows every ounce of pride he has. Homer goes to his father, not to argue, not to perform. He goes with a specific request, a patch of land, company land, far outside of town, far enough away from any structure or person that even a catastrophic failure can't hurt anything important. He presents it calmly, like a proposal, like a small businessman asking for a zoning permit. John listens, says nothing, gets up, leaves the room. Homer assumes the answer is no, but 2 days later, word comes back through the mine foreman, a man named Mr. Bykowski. They can use Cape Coalwood, a flat stretch of company land past the slag heaps miles from the nearest house. Mysteriously, nobody explains why John said yes. Homer doesn't wait around to find out. He takes the land, and he moves. Here's where the story stops being about rockets for a moment, because Homer starts to understand something that changes his entire relationship to this project. There is a national science fair. Students from across the country compete. The winners receive recognition, and, more importantly, they receive college scholarships. Homer is not Jim. He is not going to get a football scholarship. He is not going to impress a college recruiter with his athletic ability. But if he can build a rocket, scientifically, documentably, reproducibly, then maybe the science fair is his ticket out. Not just out of Coalwood, out of the future everyone has already decided for him. The problem is, Homer Hickam has inherited his father's stubbornness in full. Homer cannot bring himself to say out loud how desperately he needs this to work, because admitting need means admitting fear, and fear means his father might be right. So instead of saying the truth, he just keeps building, and the silence around his real motivation costs him later. Nobody, not Homer, not Quentin, not Roy Lee or Sherman, sees this coming. A teacher at Big Creek High School attends one of their early launches at Cape Coalwood. Miss Frida Riley. She teaches math and science. She is quiet and precise, and the kind of person who notices things most people miss. She watches the rocket go up, unstable, wobbling maybe 300 feet before it corkscrews into the ground, and she doesn't laugh. She goes back to school.
Too bad you feel that way. You know, the winners go on to the National Science Fair in Indiana.
The next day, she calls Homer to her desk after class. She places a book in front of him, Principles of Guided Missile Design, a technical manual, professional grade, the kind of text used in actual aerospace programs. Then she says, "I believe in you." 4 words. And here's the educational piece that matters here, because what Miss Riley is doing has a name in psychology. It's called the Pygmalion effect, first formally studied by researchers Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson in 1968. Their research proved that when a person in authority communicates genuine belief in someone's potential, that person's actual performance measurably rises, not because they suddenly become smarter, but because the expectation restructures what they believe is possible for themselves. Homer Hickam doesn't get smarter the day Miss Riley puts that book on his desk, but he starts believing he already is smart enough. And that rewires everything. With Miss Riley feeding them resources and Quentin driving the technical work, the rockets begin to evolve. Each launch at Cape Coalwood is a lesson. First discovery, their fuel compound is burning too hot too fast. The nozzle melts before it can channel the thrust properly. They need to slow the burn rate and control the temperature gradient. Quentin works out a new mixture using compounds they can source locally. Second discovery, stability requires fin geometry. A rocket without properly angled fins will spin and spiral regardless of how powerful the thrust is. They study aerodynamic stabilization, the same basic principle that makes arrows fly straight, the same physics that engineers at NASA are solving for on a much larger scale at the exact same moment in history. Third discovery, trajectory can be calculated mathematically before a launch ever happens. You don't have to watch it fail and guess what went wrong. You can predict it on paper. Quentin begins doing these calculations by hand at a picnic table in the woods outside Colwood. Differential equations in West Virginia in 1957 by a teenager. And the rockets stop crashing. They start flying. 200 feet, 800 feet, a quarter mile into the sky and coming down in the exact zone the math predicted. That's when Homer's eyes go wide, not with excitement, with recognition. He finally sees what has been sitting in front of him the entire time. They're not playing, they're not goofing around with bottle rockets in a field. They are conducting legitimate scientific experiments. They have documented launches, controlled variables, reproducible results, measurable fuel compositions, tracked trajectories calculated against actual physics. Dramatically, this is a science fair project, a serious one. Homer calls the group together at Cape Colwood and lays it out plain. We enter the National Science Fair. We take everything we've done, every calculation, every launch, every number, and we present it as what it actually is, real science. And if we win, we get out of here. Roy Lee stares at him. Sherman nods slowly and without expression, the way Sherman does everything. Quentin, who has never once modulated his reaction for anyone's comfort, says simply, "The mathematics fully support the submission." That's as close to enthusiasm as Quentin gets. It is enough. But Miss Riley pumps the brakes. She sits Homer down and tells him the truth that he doesn't want to hear. Their documentation is not organized enough. Their consistency across launches is not tight enough. The regional qualifier is a serious competition, not a school project. If they show up underprepared, the judges will see through it in 5 minutes. She believes in them, but belief doesn't replace preparation. Homer gets frustrated, quietly, internally frustrated in the way he handles most things, because he feels the pressure of time in a way the others don't. Every week they wait, his father is still right. Every week they delay, the mine gets 1 week closer to being unavoidable. He can't explain this to Miss Riley without exposing how desperate the stakes feel. So instead, he just pushes harder, gets up earlier, stays later at Cape Colwood, pushes Quentin for another revision. He carries the urgency alone. Then the worst week of the project arrives in a single day. A forest fire breaks out several miles from Colwood. Property is damaged. The cause is investigated. And the conclusion that comes back, unverified based on geography alone, is that a rocket launched by the Hickam boys started the fire. The school principal is called. The sheriff is involved. Their equipment at Cape Colwood is confiscated. They are ordered to stop all launches immediately. And this time, it isn't just John Hickam telling Homer his dream is foolish. It is the law. The institution of authority in Colwood has now officially agreed with Homer's father. These rockets, these boys, this dream, done. Homer does not accept it. He goes home, sits at his desk, and does the one thing nobody expects a heartbroken teenager to do. He does the math. He pulls out every record they have kept, every launch log, every trajectory measurement, every angle calculation, and he reconstructs the full flight path of every rocket they have ever launched from Cape Colwood. Then he maps the fire location against every possible trajectory. And geometrically, physically, mathematically, it is impossible. Their rockets could not have started that fire. No launch angle from Cape Colwood reaches the site of the burn. The distances don't work. The physics don't lie. Homer presents this data to the principal, then to the sheriff, not with anger, not with emotion, with numbers. The numbers win. The charges are dropped. The equipment is returned. And when Quentin hears the full story, that Homer proved their innocence through trajectory mathematics, he looks at him for a long moment and says, flatly, "You did the math." Not a celebration, just a recognition. And that recognition from the most demanding mind in the group means to Homer more than anything else that day. The regional science fair arrives. The Big Creek Missile Agency shows up in Indianapolis with their boards, their models, and their numbers. They are composed, prepared, serious. The judges approach. Everything is going perfectly, until one of the judges asks a highly specific technical question about the chemical composition of their fuel compound. Homer hesitates, just for a moment, but the judges see it. Quentin steps in and answers precisely and correctly, but the gap has already registered. The judges sense that the project has a clear technical leader, and one of the four boys is not as deep in the science as his display claims. They place, but not first. Not nationals. The train ride home is quiet. Homer sits and looks out the window at flat countryside blurring past and lets the full weight of it settle on him. The fence, the laughter, the confiscated equipment, the math he did by hand, all of it, and they still didn't make it. For the first time since October 1957, the ceiling feels real. Then John Hickam gets hurt. A serious mining accident leaves him unable to work. The man who runs the Olga mine, who has run it for years, is suddenly horizontal and at home, and the mine needs someone to fill in. There is only one Hickam available. Homer is asked to step in, to work the mine, to be temporarily what he was always supposed to become permanently. And he does it. He puts the calculations in a drawer. He packs the books into a box. He sets an alarm before sunrise and shows up with his father's lunch pail and clocks in underground. The work is physical and dark and relentless. By the end of each shift, Homer's hands are black and his back is finished and his mind is completely quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that comes from exhaustion, that doesn't care about dreams. He does this for weeks. Then, one evening, he sits at the kitchen table, still in his work clothes, still carrying the dust, and quietly, to no one, to the table, to himself, he says, "I don't want this." Not dramatically, not with tears, just plainly, honestly, the way a person tells the truth when they finally stop performing. And in that kitchen in Coalwood, that sentence is the entire movie. Because it wasn't really about the mine. It was about every person who has ever been handed someone else's life and told to live it gratefully. Homer goes back. He pulls the calculations out of the drawer, he calls the group, and he tells his father directly, for the first time without hedging, that they are going to re-enter, that they are going to the National Science Fair. John Hickam is quiet for a long moment. Then he says, "You'll end up right back here." Homer looks at his father, full eye contact, the first time he has ever held it during one of these conversations. He says, "Maybe. But not today." He inhales sharply. He walks out. They return to Cape Coalwood with everything locked in. This time, Quentin has run the fuel composition calculations 3 separate times using different methods and confirmed the same result each time. Roy Lee handles the casing fabrication with precision. Sherman runs the ignition sequence and counts every step out loud. Homer manages the documentation in real time, writing down every reading the moment it happens. They launch. The rocket climbs without wobble, clean and straight and absolutely certain. 100 feet, 500, 1,000, 2,000. It arcs at the peak, exactly where Quentin's equations said it would. It comes down in the predicted zone. They have everything. The documented fuel compound, the trajectory calculations, the reproducible results across multiple launches, the physical model, the written explanation of every scientific principle their experiments demonstrate. The Big Creek Missile Agency re-enters the National Science Fair. And this time, Homer knows every answer. The National Science Fair is a different world. Prep schools, funded laboratories, students with professional consultants behind them. and 4 boys from a coal town in West Virginia who built their equipment from mine scrap in a field. The judges don't dismiss them. They lean in. The math is airtight. The documentation is professionally presented. The experimental method is clean and defensible. When the judges ask technical questions, all 4 of them answer, because this time they all went deep enough to be ready. They win first place. National Science Fair, 1960. Homer Hickam holds the trophy and understands genuinely, fully, that this is the moment everything changes. But on the way home, he is quiet, because the one person he wants to show this to is the one person he has been arguing with since the fence, and he doesn't know what John Hickam will say. He comes home to Coalwood. Elsie wraps her arms around him and doesn't let go for a long time. She knew. She always knew. In the way mothers know things the house never says out loud. The neighbors hear. The mine workers hear. The town buzzes. John Hickam stands at the edge of the celebration. Not angry, not smiling. Just standing, watching. And Homer, who has spent 3 years trying to force a reaction from this man, finally understands something about fathers that you can only understand when you're old enough to see them as people. Some men love their children so completely and so protectively that they cannot afford to let those children be right. Because if the son is right, then the life the father built, the sacrifice he made, the world he handed down, was not the gift he thought it was. John Hickam is not a villain. He is a man whose entire identity lives inside a mountain, and his son just proved that the sky belongs to him too. But the sharpest moment of the whole story doesn't happen in Coalwood. It happens in a hospital room. Miss Riley is sick. Hodgkin's disease, a cancer of the lymphatic system, serious and progressing. The woman who put that book on his desk, who said 4 words that rewired everything, who quietly championed 4 boys from a mining town against an entire community's indifference. Homer goes to see her. She is lying in a hospital bed, smaller than he remembered, but with the same quiet certainty in her eyes. He sits beside her and tells her they won. She smiles, not with relief, with satisfaction, the deep kind that belongs to people who bet on something long before anyone else and were right the whole time. Homer walks out of that hospital and feels the full weight of what good mentorship costs and what it is worth. She believed early, without proof, without guarantee, and he carries that for the rest of his life. The launch that matters most doesn't happen in Indianapolis. It happens at Cape Coalwood on a day Homer arranges deliberately. He invites his father. John Hickam comes, recovering from his injury, walking a little slower than before, standing at the edge of the crowd with his arms folded. Homer runs the sequence exactly the way he always does. No performance, no speech, no look in his father's direction. Just the work. He lights the ignition. The rocket leaves the ground. Straight, clean, committed, carrying everything Homer spent 3 years proving, and John Hickam watches it go up. Something crosses his face that the mine never put there. Something that has no use underground. He walks over to Homer. He doesn't explain himself, doesn't revisit the arguments, doesn't acknowledge the fence or the laughter or the years of resistance. He just says, "Good shot." 2 words from a man like John Hickam. That is a complete apology, a full confession, a finished argument. It is everything. Homer Hickam earns a college scholarship. He studies engineering, serves in the army, continues his education, and eventually, the boy who was told by his own father that he would spend his life underground becomes a NASA engineer. He trains astronauts. He works on missions that leave the planet. The same planet he stood on in October 1957, head tilted back, watching a light cross the sky, and feeling something impossible take root in him. The Olga mine in Coalwood eventually closes. All mines do. The coal runs out, or the economics turn, or the mountain finally wins. The town that built its entire identity around what was underground watches that identity disappear. But Homer was already gone by then, gone into the sky he was told he couldn't touch. Here is the educational piece that closes this story completely. When Sputnik launched in October 1957, it didn't just shock the American government, it triggered one of the most significant investments in public education in American history. The National Defense Education Act of 1958 poured federal funding into science, mathematics, and engineering programs across the country. It created the infrastructure that produced an entire generation of engineers, scientists, and astronauts. It made the moon landing possible. Somewhere in the mountains of West Virginia, in a town that had never produced anything except coal, a boy watched that satellite pass and decided it meant something about what was possible for him specifically. He was right. Inspiration is the most powerful fuel ever discovered by any science, in any lab, at any altitude. And it has no weight limit. So Homer Hickam went from the most mocked dreamer in a coal town to a NASA engineer who helped put human beings into the sky he once only stared at. He didn't have money. He didn't have connections. He didn't have his father's belief. Not for a long time. Not until it mattered most. What he had was a book put on a desk by a woman who believed in him before the evidence existed, and a refusal, quiet, stubborn, and absolute, to let someone else's ceiling become his floor. Here is the question I want you to sit with. Was John Hickam wrong for pushing Homer toward the mine, or was he a father doing the only thing he knew how to do with a son he loved and didn't understand? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one.